Captain, while a great many people see you as a hero, there are some who'd prefer the word vigilante. You've operated with unlimited power and no supervision. That's something the world can no longer tolerate.
Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of From the Cinema. I'm your host Jake Smith, replacing Robert Deem, the previous host. I've asked the editing team at this point to add fireworks behind me, a giant banner that says Jake is in the house, baby, and of course maybe a couple kangaroo wipes. I want to see a graphic of a kangaroo jumping across the screen. Much like Robert Deem, I also love superhero movies. What other genre of film has so captured the hearts and wallets of the people? Superhero movies embody the post-9/11 anxieties of American politics, trying to find the answers to the chaos that spurned as a result not only of the tragic events of the day, but what came later. Patriotism, imperialism, a war of ideologies. All these qualities inform today's superhero movies. Consider Tony Stark, aka Iron Man, the first Marvel Cinematic Universe character. A billionaire who came face to face with terror after being held hostage by a group of terrorists in Afghanistan. Not only does he directly attack a group of militants in the film after escaping and becoming Iron Man, but his company is also directly involved with selling arms to these militants. A chilling reminder of Al-Qaeda's rise in the wake of Reagan's geopolitics. This will be the last time, though, that Marvel films come close to interrogating contemporary political divides, instead relying on reprogramming our collective consciousnesses towards a more industrialized cinematic product. In their most recent film, Captain America: Civil War is perhaps the most egregious of these ideological divides, setting up a promising schism that ultimately leads to nothing. According to the film review site Wikipedia, Civil War starts with the team in Lagos, duking it out with the criminal Crossbones, who's stolen biological material. In an effort to destroy Captain America, Crossbones attempts to blow himself up, but is sent flying by the Scarlet Witch. The bomb detonates, killing several Wakandian, a fictional African country, humanitarians. Meanwhile, Iron Man gives a presentation at a university and is afterwards accosted by a mother of a victim of the events from the previous film Avengers: Age of Ultron. These two events are meant to give weight to the previous film's storylines, but instead come off as cheap revisionism. What would have been a more interesting metaphorical comparison to American geopolitics goes by the wayside in favor for dulled action scenes and the typical Marvel witticisms. The most insulting aspect of Civil War is how the film portends to the Avengers causing harm and hurt to the lives of civilians, and yet no one outside the main roster of superheroes and villains seems to die on screen. Marvel clearly cannot interrogate their own heroes and would rather instead tell us they have done something wrong rather than show it. Why should we care about the effects of the Avengers when they seem to do no wrong? And any criticism of them is done through the mouths of those already affected. As a result of supposed harm, the Avengers are offered an ultimatum by the UN. Either be under the control of the UN or be considered an enemy. Iron Man seeks accountability, Captain America seeks sovereignty. This schism is complicated by the UN's destruction at the hands of the Winter Soldier, one of Captain America's old allies, who under the control of Helmut Zemo, a disgruntled super soldier whose family was killed as a result of the Avengers. As a result, Captain America and Iron Man, along with their respective allies, split off and developed a sort of conflict with one another. I myself am no stranger to conflicts between friends. Recently I went to a movie with a nameless friend who is now an ex-friend. Helmut Zemo, perhaps the most frustratingly boring and luckiest planner alive, is yet another example of wasted metaphor. Zeno's scheme hinged around creating a divide between the Avengers and then eventually splintering them, mostly through implausibly complicated steps. Zemo stands as a lone wolf who desires revenge against what is essentially a group of aliens, whether literal or metaphorical, who have no accountability anyway and whose presence creates more problems than it does solve them. Zemo is, perhaps ironically, the most relatable character in the film of invincible robots with pretend character traits, because he's the only one that sees through the clear charade that the Avengers have set up for themselves. The Avengers are dangerous, and seem to not take seriously their role as heroes, ignoring the horrible casualties they have caused. Perhaps if the Russo brothers, the team behind the camera who directed the film, had any sense of nuance, then we could have become more engaged in the trite war of these cartoon characters. Rather, though, they pull their weight and slog through, shooting asinine action sequences that lack any sort of visual scope, beyond placing actors in a frame. What they clutter into the camera is empty in substance and, quite frankly, uninteresting to watch. They presume that audiences will marvel at the bloated, fast-cut action sequences rather than engage with any sort of meaningful ideological threads. Who can blame the viewers for passively accepting this drivel when all we get are films like Civil War each year? My now ex-friend, whose name rhymes with Bathan Billiams, would rather steal my $100 popcorn and mock me on the movie review site Wikipedia than he would engage with a movie, that's for sure. Everyone else in America is programmed like Bathan. The real tragedy, though, is that the more interesting and far better crafted superhero film of this year was met with scorn by critics. Batman vs. Superman, the new Zack Snyder and DC film, also features an ideological war between Batman and Superman. Batman finds Superman to be reckless and without the best interests of humanity in heart, while Superman becomes horrified by Batman's methods of justice. Their respective philosophical dispositions not only says plenty on recent contemporary culture, but is so much more superbly constructed. Snyder turns the film into a meditation on the nature of good and evil, religious morality, and our current political divide. I can't think of a more profoundly emotional scene in an action movie than when Bruce Wayne runs into Metropolis as Superman and General Zod battle it out in the sky, destruction abounding. What seemed like an overinflated moment of action in Man of Steel becomes emotionally grounding. As Wayne runs into the smoking debris of a building to save a child, he scornfully watches as the two uncaring aliens destroy his city. Not only does the scene pull directly from 9/11 iconography, but is also emblematic of the nihilism inherent in superhero movies. As much as we pretend that these heroes have our best interests at heart, they can only do so much for us. The film interrogates heavily the notions of heroism, even subverting it at points, and profoundly so. Snyder, the director, is also a pop artist of the highest degree. Watching paint dry is closer to the Rousseau's artistic lens. Or even consider last year's horror film Green Inferno by Eli Roth. Green Inferno details a group of college students who head into the Amazon in order to protest construction that has devastated the land. Things go awry, though, when the students find themselves captured by cannibalistic natives who believe the students are the ones working to destroy their land. Roth is able to find horror not only in the visceral gore and dense tension that results of each student being picked off one at a time, but also in the subjugation of human bodies under larger systemic controls. Not only is Roth a master horror filmmaker, but he's also a sharp wit. Ironies abound in the film, but he can also blend satire and empathy to create perhaps one of the most necessary films regarding both colonialism and activism. Marvel, meanwhile, is content to chug out the most groan-inducing witticisms and shamefully empty thematic discourse. The real irony here, though, is that Rotten Tomatoes, the film critic who runs RottenTomatoes.com, gave Civil War a 90% rating while giving Batman vs. Superman a 27% rating. If Mr. Tomatoes were a little more engaged in the films he watched rather than indulge in the more commercialized product, he might have realized that Batman vs. Superman was, in fact, the better film. Marvel films only ever have the illusion of even simple narrative elements like tension, preferring to numb the viewer into ingesting their product. With a $1 billion grossing film under their belt, though, they are laughing their way to the bank, just as my ex-friend is after he stole my collection of popcorn. I do not recommend watching Civil War. Instead, I would recommend watching Batman vs. Superman, or even Green Inferno. I give this film a 3 out of 10. Thank you for watching From the Cinema. I hope to see you again.